Hey everybody, and welcome to the Kodakery. I'm Megan.
And I'm Josh.
With us today in the Kodakery is Christine Vachon. Christine is an award-winning film producer and co-owner of the production company Killer Films. Her current project, Carol, is in theaters across the country and has been garnering significant nominations. Today in the Kodakery, we will be discussing Carol, working with director Todd Haynes, shooting on film, and the challenges of producing movies. So let's jump into the Kodakery and talk with Christine.
With that, let's actually talk about Carol. So how did you become involved in this project, and what drew you to the subject matter?
Well, actually, I read the book originally in the, probably in the late 80s, early 90s. I think in 1990 it was reissued as Carol. It had originally been called The Price of Salt. And I was very struck by it, for a variety of reasons. There really wasn't anything else quite like it. It kind of walked the line between, all those popular lesbian pulp novels that came out in the 50s that we were all kind of reading ironically in the 90s. And really, it had an edge and almost it kind of dissected this couple falling in love in a way that was incredibly intellectual, but also incredibly moving. Anyway, a couple other producers were trying to turn it into a movie as early as then, and there was a script that made the rounds at some point. So I sort of was aware of it, but about 10 years after that, at least, Elizabeth Carlson got a hold of the rights. So my calendar's a little off. I think she got a hold of the rights about 5 or 6 years ago.
Okay.
But after a very long period of wanting them and sort of trying to figure out when they'd come up again, etc. She got a hold of the rights and she started working with Phyllis Naj, who was the writer-director of a movie we all made together called Mrs. Harris with Annette Bening and Ben Kingsley. So Phyllis, made the script, really wrote an impeccable script, and with Liz made it into something, really, really special. And they attached Cate Blanchett, and they attached another director who was not Todd, and they, started pulling their money together. So one day, Liz and I were on the phone about 3 years ago, and we were complaining to each other, as, producers do. That's sort of all we do when we talk to each other. And Liz said, we were just speaking to each other as close friends and colleagues. She said, I can't believe it. After all this, it looks like I'm losing my director on Carol. I want to kill myself. It's been so hard, and I thought we were finally about to, hit the finish line. And I said, something like, tell me about it. It looks like we're not getting the cast we need for Todd Haynes' new movie, and I don't think that's going to happen, when we thought it was. And then there was a silence. And then one of us said, let's show it to Todd. And literally 48 hours later, he was attached.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Man, that just, very serendipitous how that all came together.
Yeah, and unusual. I mean, because, usually, Todd tends to really pretty much do scripts that he's generated himself. Although, obviously he worked with Phyllis on the script to some degree. It's her script. But it really, in independent film, that was like, that was like a nanosecond.
Right. It sounds like this project had a very long kind of development period. Is that typical for a project? I mean, how?
Yes.
They take decades at times to come together?
Sometimes it's just like you have to wait for like the zeitgeist pendulum to swing back your way. I mean, we've had projects that we have been very excited about, and for whatever reason, we can't get cast interested, we can't get financiers interested, we get the cast but not the money, we get the money but not the cast. For whatever reason, it's just not the time for that particular project. So when that happens, we try not to say, okay, it's dead. if we really believe in its quality, we try to sort of set it aside, but keep our eyes and ears open, for the right moment, We have a film going to Sundance called Goat by Andrew Neil, and it's based on a script that was written at least 10 years ago, originally by David Gordon Green. And, we couldn't get it made then. And then, we had the great good fortune to get to know Andrew and his work and realize that he was the perfect person.
That's fantastic. So in this process is the role, like how do you shepherd these things along? I mean, how many projects do you tend to have going at once if it takes potentially, 10 years to get something off the ground like that?
Well, we have a lot of projects happening in sort of all within our orbit, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
We shot the Todd Solondz film last spring. We just finished an Andrew Dasanmu film with Michelle Pfeiffer. We are, talking about shooting Todd Haynes' next film this coming spring. And then we've got any number of potential television project, web series, all kinds of different ideas moving forward, again, like just, in our world.
Well, you've actually worked a lot with Todd Haynes in the
Yes.
past. What keeps bringing you guys back together?
We really started our careers together, and there's something really fortuitous about that because, we're the same age. We went through, some tough times together. When we made Poison back in, I guess, 1991, it was in the middle of the AIDS crisis, and there was a sense of urgency about telling your stories and making your films that was really, it's hard to explain if you weren't living it, but it absolutely touched everything that we did, especially whatever means of creative expression, we could get our hands on. And, going through something like that with someone, you feel like you've really, like you've been through a war.
Right.
So, there's that. There's, we have a very strong friendship, and, but I think at the base, it's simply I feel so lucky. I just feel like I had the good fortune to, to see his film Superstar, the Karen Carpenter story, really early on, and realize that it was, that it was indicative of the kind of movies I really wanted to be involved in. It was provocative. It was incredibly innovative and original, and it was entertaining. And I just thought, like, that's it, like eureka. So that's what I've been looking for.
Right.
Well, as a producer in general, how do you find projects? Do you seek them? Do people reach out? Is there any order to it?
I'm like yes to all of those things. I mean, we built up relationships with a number of directors who we love working with and whose work we love. So those obviously, the writer directors are sort of what people think of killer. When they think of killer, that's what they think of first. But then, we go to film festivals. If we see work that we love, we reach out to the director. We're working with Alex Ross Perry, who's an extraordinary filmmaker, and that's because we saw his film. Now the name of the film is escaping my mind, but it'll come back to me. And so that's that's another way. Or we look at shorts. Agencies give us scripts. We hear about a cool script. It's kind of, we read an article we love. We read a book that we love. Any kind of way you can possibly get a hold of something, we practice.
Excellent. So, and congratulations are in order on the Golden Globe and the SAG nominations.
Oh, thanks.
That's really exciting. What does that mean for a film to get that type of recognition?
It's great. I mean, the film is coming out very slowly. I think the Weinstein Co. has been doing an extraordinary job, And I think that especially because people, right now it went to 16 theaters today, but for the past 3 or 4 weeks it's only been in 4. Across the country. So I think that, with the Critics Awards and the Globe nominations, it's just building that kind of excitement. People are, really, like, their anticipation is building in a great way.
Yeah.
Excellent. And both Cate Blanchett and Rooney Mara have been nominated for Best Actress, which for the Golden Globes has just got to be really exciting. So can you talk about their performances and what they brought to the storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, Kate has worked with Todd before, and me. I'm not there. I mean, she's a true master of her craft. I mean, and I'm not there. She played, a young Bob Dylan type character, about as far from Carol as you can possibly get.
Right.
And so Todd was able to rehearse with them, which we don't always get to do, because our budgets are challenging, and sometimes the actors have carved out such a tiny period of time that they can be with you that you can't spend any of that time doing anything except filming them. But on Carol, I think he had a little time, and so he was able to really work with the two of them. And people keep praising the film for what people don't say as much as what they do say.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that extraordinary tension and the imagery was, the seeds of that were sown in those rehearsals. Kate was attached when Todd came on, which was, part of the reason he decided to come on. And Rooney was the part he really got to cast. So I think that was pretty exciting for him. And he, of course, he was a big fan of hers from some of her, well-known earlier work. But I think in Carol, it's a Rooney you've never seen before.
Right. Yeah. And Carol was shot on film. So
Super 16.
How did that impact the storytelling? And I'm sure that it impacted Kate and Rooney too. How did that play a role in the whole thing?
Well, look, Todd and his DP Ed Lackman have been shooting on film. Todd hasn't not yet. I believe he's done a few smaller things or commercials where he's shot on digital, but for his feature projects, and including his miniseries for HBO, Mildred Pierce, that was also on Super 16. And he tends on I'm Not There. He used a variety of different film stocks. So he loves working with film. He loves the texture. He loves the grain. I think that when people see Carol, they often come out. I was lucky enough to do some Q&As the opening weekend at the Angelica and the Paris in New York, and a lot of people were just going on and on about how extraordinary the film looked, and they sort of were like, there was this, and they would sort of put their, rub their hand in front of their face as if they were rubbing a window or a mirror, in like a circular motion. They were like, there was this thing on the something about the screen, about the image, and I was like, it's grain. That's what you're trying to say. It's grain, and it's exciting. Look, we do a lot of movies in digital too, and there's reasons why we do one movie in one medium as opposed to another, and I'm glad we have that choice.
Sure.
Right.
But given the mood that Carol was evoking, 1952, New York, winter, I can't imagine it any other way.
Yeah, we haven't had a chance to see the movie yet, but
the
trailer is beautiful, and just the way the colors come across, the warm colors, all of it. I mean, we can't wait to see it, and it really looks like a beautiful movie. So as we talk about a little bit about shooting on film, and we totally get that it's an artist's choice. We want to make sure that there's various toolboxes.
It's not always an artist's choice. That is actually not true. I'd say many filmmakers want to shoot in film, and it's prohibitive for their budgets for various reasons.
That was going to be my next question, actually, was how film, as a producer, working on kind of you're driving the budgets and a lot of the financial decisions that have to be made. How does shooting on film versus digital impact that? And in some cases, as you say, that it may be prohibitive. That was a big storyline on Project Greenlight, for example. That
Yes.
so could you talk a little bit about the challenges there?
Um, I mean, at the end of the day, it really is the fact that, film is that there's less of it being shot. So the resources are dwindling in terms of like where you can actually get it processed, et cetera. I mean, you guys must be more aware of that than anybody.
Yeah. Yep.
So it becomes more difficult, when you're trying to sort of make a case for it to just figure, it takes longer, or it just throws up on a tiny movie where you can't really throw money at an issue. It can just sometimes seem prohibitive.
Mm-hmm.
I also feel like some movies just benefit from it more. And there's some films that are very well served by shooting on digital for a variety of reasons, because maybe they can be a little bit more nimble, and the storytelling doesn't require that patina, excuse me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like I would argue on Project Greenlight that Effie was right, and the movie didn't need to be shot on film.
Right. Well, and that's when I said artist choice, I think that's what I really was getting to, is that we want the toolbox of tools to be available so that if a project needs film, film is there. But not every project
Absolutely.
should be done on film, and that we absolutely
get
agree
it,
with
yeah.
100%.
Absolutely.
Yep. So could we talk a little bit about you? I mean, you've been extremely successful, produced so many wonderful films, and we have the audience for the Kodakery is going to be people across the board, and we're going to have a lot of young people trying to break into the business. And so could you talk a little bit about how you got your start and the journey that you've had?
Sure. I mean, I had the good fortune to, I grew up in Manhattan. I went away to college in Providence, Rhode Island, came back to New York in the mid-'80s, and there were a lot of filmmakers starting to make their first movies, like Jim Jarmusch and Spike Lee and Betty Gordon. And up until that point, I really thought that there was a very strong divide, that there was Hollywood movies and there were experimental films or non-Hollywood films that tended to be aggressively anti-narrative. And to be honest, I didn't find terribly interesting. And when I saw the first movies of some of the filmmakers I mentioned, I was blown away because they were such personal, original stories, but they needed production. They had to be, they were art directed and costume designed and DP'd but they were very often not so experimental in form, but wildly experimental in content, and sometimes both. I started working on a film called Parting Glances that Bill Sherwood directed. That was Steve Buscemi's first film, I believe. And that taught me an enormous amount about the sort of, it was a very personal story and the kind of intensity and passion necessary to get something like that on the screen. And it was so good. So then I kind of, I was a production assistant. I worked in various departments, locations. Assistant directing is kind of where I landed, because that was very much being at the heartbeat of a film set. You knew everything, you organized everything. It was kind of a good place for me. Then I started working with two people I had been at Brown with, Todd Haynes and Barry Ellsworth, to start a short film, a company to make short films, which I know sounds like a very commercial endeavor. Not. But we, for some reasons, we got it into our heads. There was a lot of grant money at that time. We got it into our heads that we were going to actually produce work with people who wanted to make short films and actually produce them. And then Todd Haynes made Superstar, not as part of our company, which was called Apparatus. And then, when he started thinking about making his next project, I just kind of jumped in front of him and said, and I will be producing that.
Nice.
So,
Great. How about being a woman, like as being a producer? Do you think that played a role? Was it hard? Did it not affect
I
things?
always have a hard time with that question because I don't know what it's like not to be one. So it's a hard compare and contrast.
Fair enough.
I mean, I know right now we're in the midst of a big discussion about the lack of female directors on both, the small and big screen. And I really appreciate the transparency that it's kind of forcing everyone to be somewhat more accountable. And even Killer, even though I think our track record's really good, it could be better. And it's forcing us to be more introspective as well. I feel like in some ways, I have male colleagues who came up in the business with me who have left. And one of the reasons they've left producing is they cite, continually dealing with a perceived lack of respect or condescension by new young financiers who think they know how to do it better than you, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess my response to that sometimes is like, because I am female, I'm used to being condescended to. And I've figured out, coping mechanisms to let it roll right off me. I don't even, I'm very pragmatic. I just see the goal at hand and go for it. And, I'm fine with, having to deal with a little perceived disrespect. Well, that's not true. With that kind of perceived condescension,
Yeah.
if I can get around it to get what I need.
Yeah.
In other words, I think producing it's a difficult job. A colleague once said, producing is like being asked to organize like the best party in the world, being handed the check and not being invited. And that's absolutely true. We work our butts off on a movie only to find when we get to the film festival that our names aren't even listed in the catalog. That kind of stuff happens all the time.
Yeah. Well, that's a shame. But
Yeah.
in general, it sounds like being a woman has just made you stronger, if anything, if nothing
I
else.
suppose.
Right? One way to look at it.
Yes.
So, in your time, how is the industry changing? Like we talked a little bit just a minute ago about the transparency that's coming. Like, what trends are you seeing? Like, what changes have you seen since you started, with your career as a producer?
I've certainly seen since I started hiring people on film crews in the early 90s. I remember back then it was like, and I gave two women DPs a big start. One was Ellen Curris and one was Maryse Alberti, who shot Creed. And I'm really happy to say I think they both shot their first narrative features with me. So we were sort of pioneering at that time. Like, women DPs felt few and far between, and a female gaffer or grip was practically unheard of. And that's really changed. Like now, film crews feel a lot more mixed in every sense of the word. So that's cool. I think what digital has had a real seismic shift in. I think people are still trying to figure out the kind of impact that has on the sort of stories they want to tell. And, in terms of just film financing itself, there's tremendous downward pressure on our budgets. That can be attributed, obviously, to the fact that, DVD as a recoupment mechanism is dead and buried. So, and that happened like overnight. So
Right.
The film business didn't replace it, it's not figured out what to replace it with. And the fact that so much of our financing strategies are based on foreign sales-based pre-sales, which puts a tremendous amount of pressure on casting, and also means like the kind of movies I make, they're often called execution dependent, which means in layman's terms, no one knows if they're going to be worth anything until they're done and they're good. So that's made life, tougher for us. All of that said, I think it's a time of great opportunity. I totally, my glass is definitely half full. The fact that there's so many different kinds of platforms to put your, to exploit your work on, different ways for people to see your work, different kinds of stories that you can tell for these different kinds of platforms, I think is pretty awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like we're at a time where there's there's so many tools for people to make content and to start to tell their stories on big and small levels. And then really, you mentioned DVD sales like Netflix and Hulu and a lot of these new people who aren't just streaming content, but actually creating content.
That's right.
Do you see them as becoming a larger fixture in the industry?
Well, I think they're already, I mean, look at the Golden Globes, you know.
Right.
They're already staking their claim. And, you know, I haven't seen Chirac yet, but it looks great, and it's getting fantastic reviews. And it feels like, you know, what Amazon is doing is kind of like a return to that, you know, those mid-level budget movies that everyone is moaning about missing so much. Hopefully we'll put our money where our mouth is and go see them.
Right, right. So what about, we talked about the audience that we're going to have, young filmmakers trying to break into the industry today. Do you have any tips, any advice for a new person trying to break into the industry?
Well, I think my biggest advice is, you know, young filmmakers have to start thinking very entrepreneurially. And, you know, there's no excuse now not to be able to make work. You know, people can shoot entire films, obviously, like Tangerine, on their iPhones. So the most important thing is to start proving that you can tell a story, so that when you encounter somebody, you know, some kind of gatekeeper like me or people who work with me, you can immediately show us, look, I know what I'm doing. I know, you know, I know how to put images together in an effective way. I think, you know, building community is one of those buzzwords people are talking about all the time these days, and building an audience, etc. But I think what it really means is, you know, I mean, I think like crowdfunding, for example, is so much more about building an audience than it is about actually getting your movie financed. And that idea of reaching out and making a community invested in you as a storyteller, you know, and figuring out ways to do that, you know, that's really, I guess, what it's all about now.
Yeah, and I've seen, Kickstarter as an example has almost become a proof of concept. Like,
exactly.
I've seen that happen in comic books and film and lots of different places where people are using that to kind of say, look, there is an interest in this.
That's right.
And social media can be the same, and it's such a huge, again, when you talked about seismic shift, I mean, the ability to just go directly out and build your own audience it's so different than it used to be. Absolutely. We really appreciate you joining us. It's been a great to talk to you. We really appreciate it. We can't wait to see Carol. And as we've talked, I would love to maybe even someday in the future, if you had time, maybe get you and a couple producer colleagues and do an episode about producing. I think there's so much interest, kind of behind the scenes things that people just don't know about.
Right. To get some exposure.
I'd be delighted.
Exposure into what you guys actually do, and so people can get exposed to that. Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of myths surrounding producing, and I think part of that is because, you know, people see, especially these days, there's like 10 executive producers and 2 associate producers, and then who's the co-producer, and they just like, who are all these people?
Yeah,
you know?
Yep.
And it is confusing. It can be confusing to us sometimes. And, you know, if you're a writer or a director and the financier comes along and they say, I'm going to put up X amount of money for your budget, but in exchange I want a co-writing credit, the answer is like, what are you, on crack? But
Right.
If they say, you know, but I want a co-producing credit, the answer is always okay. But of course, I would also argue they deserve it because they are putting up that money, and that's what's getting the movie made. You know,
Yeah.
So it's a tough one. Really being able to say, what is it that a producer does? It can be 3 paragraphs of they approved of this and they signed that contract and they do that, or it can just be 1 line, they get the movie made.
Right. But in that, I bet there's a lot of good storytelling and just behind the scenes stuff we could dig into. So that, so thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you being here, and we look forward to seeing Carol, and we'll be rooting for it during award season.
Excellent. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Christine.
Take care.
Bye.
It is a great satisfaction to be able to speak to you through the medium of this wonderful invention.